Welcome to Positive Philter with your host, Philip Wilkerson, a podcast that focuses on friends, family, health, and career, with a little self-help along the way. Please join me in this journey for self-improvement, and I hope what I have to share will make you a better person, thus making the world a better place. I hope you enjoy the show. I hope you enjoy the show. Hello, people of the world. It's Philip Wilkerson back with another episode of Positive Philter. Actually, this is going to be one of my most favorite episodes. I put a lot of pressure on my mother-in-law. Now, if you know me, you know our journey. Had the great pleasure of living with my mother-in-law, and we share a very special bond, not only because I'm her, adopted son or second son or son she never had, but also we also have a very similar upbringing growing up. And so this has been a podcast in the making for 5 years? I don't know, I'm just joking. But ever since I was like, I'm going to get you on here, and the day is finally here. So, Joan, just let the listeners know a little bit about yourself.
Hi, it's wonderful to be here with you, Philip. We've been talking about this for a long time. And, I'm a psychotherapist in private practice. I'm still working, which is wonderful. And I think my journey as an Army brat has really helped me understand how the world operates. And so from the age of 2, we didn't stop traveling, and we're still moving. So the interesting thing that Philip and I always talk about is that the term Army brat. We're never sure if we should call ourselves brats, but I looked it up, and the origin was the British Regiment Attached Traveler. That's what it stood for, so that we weren't really bratty kids, we were attached travelers, and that's what it came from, the British Army. So anyway, I'm impressed with my parents' resilience, especially my mother, who had to make changes every 3 or 4 years without any control over where we'd move, where we'd end up. And she and my father just embraced every culture. So from the age of 2, we were sent to Salzburg, Austria, where my sister was born a few years later. And my parents had grown up in Portland, Maine. My mother was a school teacher. My father was also in teaching. He got his master's at Columbia University and planned to teach the rest of his life. And so they moved to Long Island, where he got a job in a high school. And the next thing we know, he was called up as a what do you call it?
Reservist?
Reservist, yeah. Reservist. And we land in Salzburg, Austria in 1953, and we're in a farmhouse for a year. So they go from Portland, Maine. Well, Dad went to BU in Columbia, so he got out of Maine. But from Long Island, we went to Salzburg, Austria, and that started our journey. And it was wonderful. I mean, I still remember Salzburg. We lived there for 3.5 years, and I'm actually going back this summer with my sister to see it. And they embraced the whole culture of, they learned a little bit of German. We had some interesting adventures with the Austrian population, where Krampus visited my home, not planned, while my parents were out of town, but that's a whole other story. So after Salzburg, we went to Tucson, Arizona. So that's where you go. You go from
one place to
one place to the other.
Place,
yeah. So my father taught ROTC in Tucson. So what a change going from the Alps, Sound of Music country, to the Wild West. And that was a wonderful experience. Again, my parents embraced the Southwest culture, the Native American culture, and that became our life for 3 years. I went to different school every year, kindergarten, first and second, had totally different schools. And we just loved it. Again, my parents' resilience was amazing. And then from there, we went to Maine because my father was sent to Iran.
Okay.
And at the last minute, we were supposed to go to Iran, but at the last minute, Eisenhower said no families. And so that was when the Shah was still in power. And so my father lived in Iran for a year. We didn't see him, talk to him, couldn't FaceTime. You know, there was just letters for 1 year. So that was quite a year because that year my grandfather died, my mother's father died in Maine, and her sister-in-law died. So that was quite a year for all of us. But I had a wonderful time walking to school with my cousin Chris in the snow. Schools never close there unless it's a blizzard. So that was a wonderful experience. And then the next station we were stationed in was New Jersey. So for 4 years we were in New Jersey. Again, my father was an instructor in the Signal Corps. And that was, I went to 3 different schools in New Jersey. And so, like Philip and I talk about this idea that friends become so important to you. They become like family because you don't really know I didn't really know my grandparents very well. We hardly ever saw them. I didn't know my cousins very well. So, you know, your friends become like family, but you also have to let go every 3 or 4 years. You know it's coming.
I was about to say, and I want to keep on going because I love to see your full journey because this is a great format for this, and then I have some questions off of that. But yeah, I'm gonna hold that thought about friends and family, but I want you to keep on chronologically going through, and then we're gonna have questions off of those. But I think this is a great, like 3 schools. I'm already counting. It's like 6 schools already. But I want you to finish, and I have so many questions off of that. So
we love New Jersey. We lived in 3 different houses. Again, we also lived in 3 different houses in Tucson. We rented, and every year the lease would be up, and we had to move. So that was, talk about instability. Yeah. But my parents just embraced it, and it worked. So in New Jersey, we had a wonderful time going to the ocean every weekend. There was a military beach for military dependents and officers and enlisted. So we'd go there every weekend. And that was a great experience. And then all of a sudden, my father comes home one day and says, "Okay, we're going to Bogota, Colombia." And we're like, "Where? Bogota, Colombia? Are you kidding?" And I was in 7th grade, and so I got to finish 7th grade in April, which was a thrill. And they put us on a Grace line, ocean liner, to Panama. So that was amazing. And my sister and I were the only kids on the ship. So we had a great time running around the ship and having lots of attention from the staff. Well, we land in Panama, and a driver comes to pick us up, and we're supposed to go report in. My father has to report in to the fort. It was in Balboa. I can't remember the name of it. Fort Clayton, I think. Yeah. In Panama. And we're driving in the countryside in Panama, and all of a sudden we go through this little village, and this woman starts to cross the road, and she runs back, and then at the last minute runs again, and we hit her. Our car, she goes over the hood of the car, and we're in shock. And so the whole village surrounds our car. So we've been in Latin America for about 4 hours. Jeez. And this is our introduction, and it's sweltering hot. It's the jungle. And we're all dressed in suits that my mother had us wear, because when we left in April in New York, it was freezing. So we're in wool suits, sitting in the back seat, and these people are staring at us in the car. And my father and the driver talked to the people, and an ambulance came, and she was taken away, and we never really found out what happened to her. But that was our introduction to South America.
Oh, my goodness.
So we lived in Bogota, Colombia for 4 years, and that was my favorite place.
And we can have a whole episode. I'm gonna chunk it because I know that's like your favorite part. We could have like a whole episode about that. So 4 years there, and then what happened after that?
Well, the 4 years were just amazing. All my friends were from the military, State Department, oil companies. It was an international school, so we went to school with the wealthiest Colombians who could afford a private school like ours, and then all the pobres, as we called them, the Americans. We didn't have the wealth that the Colombians did, but we learned to just love the country. We loved the people. We loved the music. We loved the culture. And my mother and father embraced that culture. We'd have Colombian generals at a party almost every weekend in our living room, dancing cumbia. So we had we all had very interesting social lives. The kids had we all had wonderful parties every weekend in people's homes. I rode horseback 3 days a week. I was starting to jump when I left there. So that was a wonderful experience. And the interesting thing is, even today, I'm still getting together with some of the people I went to high school with in Colombia. So in the DMV here, there's people from all over whose parents were stationed in Bogota. So we get together every 2 months, and it's like we never left Bogota. I mean, it just feels like we're still very much together. One of the hardest moves was coming back to the States for my senior year of high school. We had to leave. We extended another year because we loved Bogota so much. We were supposed to only stay 3, but we stayed another year. And so the hardest year was coming back to the States after 4 years in Colombia as a senior in high school to a little town, Carlisle, Pennsylvania. My father was stationed at the Army War College. And it was a big change. I had a few other friends who were seniors who had to move. So we all kind of hung on to each other. But that was a big change. But it was fine. I mean, but I wasn't quite prepared for what should I do now after my senior year? I'm obviously going to college, but I had no idea where to go. And so a friend from Bogota called me and said, "Hey, do you want to go to Texas Women's University?" And I went, "Okay, where's that?" Yeah. So I applied to Texas Women's University, went there for a year. I hated it. And another Army brat friend said, at Texas Women said, "Well, let's go to University of Texas." So I went, "Okay." So we went to University of Texas. So in the meantime, my parents are in Pennsylvania, but I'm in Texas. But they had a Department of Latin American Studies, which is one of the best in the country. And I loved Austin, so that was my time there.
So you had quite a storied journey, and I was wrote it down, and just so many schools and so many homes. As a child, and this is the part we identify a little bit. It's almost like a cycle of get to know people in grief. And when I say that, for me, it always took 1 year to get acclimated, make a friend, and then it took me a whole year to say goodbye. And you go through that cycle a lot. Did you feel that way too?
All the time. I mean, we wrote to friends. That was before all this social media. We really had to write letters or rarely phone calls, but mostly letters. And but you start to anticipate that too, that anticipatory grieving that goes on because you're going to have to leave. And so the attachments are strong, but there's this sense that this is going to end, and I'm not sure I'll ever see these people again. That's why this is so special with this group and this the whole
Columbia group.
Yeah, the Colombian group, because we share this special bond that we'll always have.
And I'm always curious. I mean, you had all these different places in the world. And then why at Carlisle was that the stopping point that, that they planted roots at the end rather than going, back to Jersey or going back to Maine?
Yeah. So my parents found that there was a very nice community of retired military. It was a small town. It's centrally located. And in the middle of the country or in the middle of the state, they liked that. And they just liked the people. And there was a PX on a commissary right there, and so a lot of people ended up retiring in Carlisle.
Yeah, it's kind of like the DMV area. Like, I see more, but like this area is so military heavy because you're like, wow, this is good. I'll stay, and that's how.
Yeah, and they were tired of moving.
Yeah. But I mean, I'm just always curious too. Like, did any family like, come on, man, like you're done with the military, come back to Maine? Your aunts and uncles and cousins. Or...
Yeah, well, they were always kind of puzzled by our life. They didn't really understand what it was all about. But I wrote a story for the Maine magazine about how I always told people I was from Maine. And I still do sometimes, saying, well, I'm from Maine, but I only lived there 2 years. I was born there, lived there a year before we went to Long Island, and then I lived there in third grade. But that was home base, and the Army would send us back to Maine before our next assignment, which was amazing. I don't know if they still do that. But,
I love that. So you had identity to that, to Maine. Yeah. And like, we went over the summer, you still have that strong family attachment. Yeah. And also, you said recently you're going back to your roots in Ireland, that the military, your father wasn't this is generational. You had some military family members in your family and their history. Yeah. Can you share that a little bit about that?
So we're going to go visit my grandfather's home in Ballyshannon, Ireland, in Donegal this summer. But he was drafted by the British Army when he was about 18, 19. And he served in the British Army in the Irish Guard before he came to the States. So when my father went into the Army, my grandfather was thrilled. And then my father ended up being a colonel. So my grandfather was very proud to have a colonel in the family. It was kind of consistent with that.
Awesome. I mean, so generational. And then, when, you look at my dad and you could just tell that he's military, how he carries himself. How about your father? Just
definitely.
Like, can you, share, like, even after all this moving and just the way he carried himself as a, retiree, that you could just tell he was still military? Is there anything he still did? Like, I could share some stuff, like my dad still makes his bed real tight, and I don't know, he just seems sometimes, even when he wears these Hawaiian shirts, you could just look at him and say, like, the way that he organizes his life is very structured.
Well, I think they learned to be very structured, and maybe, that's a big part of being an officer, And he was always an instructor wherever he all his assignments were as instructors because of his education background. So, I have also funny story. When I think of him, he was an instructor in New Jersey at Fort Monmouth, and he had just come back from Iran. So all of his friends, he had made many friends who were Iranian officers who were sent over to study at Fort Monmouth, and they would come over to our house Friday nights for pizza. And so we were surrounded by Iranians that were wonderful, and we just had a great time. But I thought, what an interesting life that I'd come home to 5 Iranian officers having pizza in our dining room.
That is amazing.
Yeah.
Now, I think we kind of flashed through about your father was an instructor. It's like my dad was a helicopter pilot and all these things. So what was your father's assignment really throughout his military career mostly?
Well, he was in Signal Corps. Okay. So I think in Bogota he was advising the Colombian Army how to develop communication systems to. And that was right before FARC and in Colombia, then the violence that came a little bit later after we left. But speaking of violence, though, they declared martial law when we were living in Bogota. And we had several bomb threats at night from the embassy would call and say, don't let your kids or your family sleep near a window tonight. So like, thanks a lot. Yeah. And then one of my friends, her house was bombed. Her father was he was the Air Force attaché, and their house was bombed. So there were threats against Americans while we were there.
Did you feel like, like heightened sense of danger, or are you kind of like, like you're a kid, like, it's kind of like a kid's lens, like your parents kind of shield you from how scary it is?
Well, I mean, we had guards at our house whenever my father left the city. so they would send two young soldiers who were, I don't think, well educated in artillery at all, because they would point the rifles at us as we'd walk up to our house. And we'd say, "We live here." But every time they left, my father left, and his other friends or other colonels in the neighborhood, they would send two guards to each house. So that was a little scary.
It seems very scary.
Yeah, yeah.
And so your father is, quite bright in intelligence and all. Did he pick up all these languages? And
Yes.
what was that like? Just being able to pick up Iranian and all these languages.
He spoke Farsi. He learned Farsi in Iran. He learned German, a little bit of German, and a lot of Spanish. But again, only in his area, in his work area. He couldn't talk to we had two maids at home.
Yeah.
And every American family had maids at home because you couldn't leave your house empty, or
someone would rob it.
It would be robbed. It totally wiped out. So we had maids there 24 hours a day, and so he could speak to the military about Signal Corps, but he really had trouble ordering coffee or.
So did y'all do that for him? He was like, come here, kids.
Yeah, my sister and I learned Spanish very quickly, and then she and I both majored in Latin American studies, and I also learned some Quechua, which is the native language of Bolivia, spoken in the Andes in Peru, Ecuador, and Bolivia. So my plan was to go back to South America to be an anthropologist. So I minored in anthropology, but the funny story about that is I was all ready to go to Peace Corps, and I went to the Peace Corps recruiter, and I said, "Well, I speak Spanish, I speak some Quechua, I've lived in Latin America, I think I could be helpful in Peace Corps," and the guy goes, "No, I don't think you have any skills." And so he goes, "Try the Vista booth." So I went, okay. So I went to the Vista booth, and they went, yeah, we could use you. And so I signed up for Vista, and I was sent to El Paso. So I went back to Pennsylvania, and then got the letter from Vista saying, "You show up in Dallas for training, and then you're going to El Paso." And the nice part about that story is that's where I met Jeff. Yeah. So that was wonderful.
Well, and I'm going to dive in a little bit, but what was the acceleration process like learning Spanish? Do you also think I've heard studies say that kids learn it faster because I guess their brain is more malleable to languages.
Yes. Yeah.
So you and your sister caught it up real quick.
Very quickly.
How was that? Like a year? Like how'd y'all immerse yourself in learning Spanish?
Well, we took Spanish in school. Everybody had to learn Spanish in school in Colegio Nueva Granada, and then at home we spoke to the maids, and they taught us a lot of Spanish, so that really helped.
What about just at the school? Did y'all flip back and forth with your Colombian friends?
Yes,
and that accelerated your learning and stuff like that.
Yeah, but they all spoke perfect English.
Yeah,
they had been going to an international school most of their lives, so they had been learning English since they were in preschool.
So even though they spoke perfect English, did y'all try to speak them in Spanish to make yourself practice or
we'd
something?
We'd go back and forth. Yeah.
Gotcha. Yeah. Or like maybe when you want to talk about your parents in front of them, you would use Spanish.
Yeah.
Okay. So
another interesting story about Bogota is my last year there, my junior year, one of my best friends was the British ambassador's daughter, and she had finished school in London and was sent to Bogota with her parents. And she was the only child in the embassy. She had a brother in London. But we had a wonderful time. She had the embassy to herself because her parents traveled all the time. So here she was 16 going on 17 and had the embassy and the whole staff to herself.
It's like a party movie or something. Seems like a setup for like a party movie.
Oh, yeah. There were a lot of parties there. And things that, one night she and I decided to take she had a big, like a Rolls Royce in the garage, and we decided to take it out and try to drive it. So she drove. But I thought, oh my gosh, we could have gotten into so much trouble.
Also, that's a dope story. You're riding a Rolls Royce.
And neither of us know how to drive.
And it was stick, right? Like,
yeah.
That's crazy. I mean, how far did y'all get? Did y'all make it around town?
Just around the block and
That's
back.
it. Y'all are too. Y'all see very responsible, rebellious teens. Like, so I mean, and talk about the culture shock one more. I know that we could probably have a whole episode on your Columbia experience, but I think one of the things that really does stand out to me was your almost reacclimation to America, and like how that was, and how it's like, you had such an exciting life in Colombia, and you're like, okay.
Well,
tell us about that.
And I was surprised looking back how shy I was. I mean, I've always been more of an introvert. I've always been a little shyer. But my sister and I clung to my mother that summer when we'd go out to a mall. I mean, that was part of the culture shock, is that, we just didn't know how to dress. We didn't know what we were supposed to act like. We finally grew out of that pretty quickly. But in those first few months, we just felt really... And that was 1968. So all the violence going on when Martin Luther King and Robert Kennedy was killed. I mean, we just kept thinking, what is going on in this country? It really, we all wanted to go back to Colombia.
Yeah, you got planted back into I could, now thinking about it, like historically, that was just like a really not turbulent time, but a lot going on in America.
And very sad.
Yeah. I mean, like, welcome back to America.
Yeah.
How about going before that? Were y'all looking at America from the outside in Colombia, like reading the newspaper, or how were y'all keeping up? Or you were kind of like, it was like a different, like a bubble. Like you
it was kind of a bubble. And especially being in high school, I don't think we were that interested in, current events.
Yeah, so that was, I think that probably could exacerbate that dropped in foreign territory, because you weren't plugged in on what's going on.
Yeah.
Wow. How about the opposite? Like when you missed Colombia, were you trying to still keep up what was going on in Colombia from America when you came back?
Well, mostly just friends. I wasn't that political then. I became more political in college, but not.
But just writing like the group, keeping the group
keeping
together.
up the group, writing to all my friends and
how they were doing. How they were doing. How about through college too? Y'all still y'all stayed together a lot. Like
not so much. We kind of dropped off again, and then just maybe 10 years ago, a friend from Bogota started reaching out to us, and we all started meeting every couple months, and so. That was, that made a big difference. Yeah,
maybe let's talk about that. Maybe how did that re-engagement, start?
Well,
and
Peggy,
how has that been really good
Peggy
for you?
Donald and I, we met for lunch one day, and I said, well, we should start doing this regularly. And she would come from Annapolis, and we'd have lunch together. And so she started reaching out to everybody, and all the people who were in the DMV, and we just have... really.
Just via email and all that stuff.
Yeah. So it's been, and now we're starting to meet in each other's houses instead of restaurants, because we have so much to say. We have a lot to talk about. So going back to that, right? You have this common bond, and some of the people of this Columbia group are the Colombian kids as well, right? That live in America now. Yeah.
Or mostly...
some of the Colombians have come. Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
And then. What are some commonalities? Like, does everyone still speak pretty fluent Spanish really well, or they all have different careers or very similar careers? Like, how does that group look right now?
All very different professions, really interesting. But people are just so fascinating. I mean, they've all done so many different things, and very resilient. You can see the resilience in the people that in my friends. But there's one became an ambassador. He was an ambassador to one of the African countries, and I think it was Chad. So some went into foreign service, some went into education, some went into business, government. But you were talking earlier about how the resilience.
Yes.
And that's something that I see in working with clients who are dealing with. Who are struggling with challenges in their life. But I'm also glad to hear from from Maggie telling me about the schools here are now embracing the military kids.
Yeah.
Maggie, my daughter, who's the school social worker, is finding that that there's a lot more recognition that these kids are more vulnerable. They need a lot of support when they come in brand new from their last assignment. And the parents need a lot of support. And so I think that's a big change. And the military finally realized that these, what did they call them? Attached travelers.
The brats.
The brats need some help. And the parents do. Especially, most of them are, the mothers were left behind when the fathers had to, now it's more almost equal now that women are officers and leaving the kids behind too. That's been a big change. I think I would love to I did work with military families for a long time, my practice in Mount Vernon, and I'd like to do that again.
It's very powerful. And I think about that too, is like, one of the things I was always jealous of, every time I move and come back, it was like, well, these people, like, the feeling of planting roots in a community is something I always wanted, right? Like, I always just wanted to go to one school and everyone know who I am, and like they know our families and our families know the people. I always hated that I had to reintroduce myself feeling. Like, it felt like reintroduction, even to people I knew, like, going back to the same school, and, I had my best friend Marcus, but I had to feel like I had to reintroduce myself to Marcus and catch up on inside jokes. And I think we all know about the sense of belonging to well-being and a sense of community, right? And you have it, right? You make a community with other military kids, but it's always like this disruptive community, as opposed to like, we live here, we're in Fairfax. Our kids are going to get to play, Bennett's going to play sports with the same kids growing up. Yeah. That's good for, he feels a part of something. And I don't know, I think you really spoke to it. I think we're seeing like, that's really important for these military kids too.
Yeah, yeah. Well, and I'm glad that Maggie and Katie grew up with the stability that they had. But because I still feel like I'm not from Virginia. I mean, I don't identify with Virginia, even though I love living here and I value everything it has to offer, but I don't feel like I'm a Virginian.
Right.
And then I go back to, I'm from Maine. It's like, but I'm not, the people in Maine don't think of me as a Mainer.
Yeah, it's like a nomad kind of feeling, like a traveler without a home or base, but we travel. Yeah. Which on the flip side, this is kind of, the positives though, is that you said the resiliency. And also I think the positives, and I think we share this too, is that like, I know we're talking about like, oh, we embrace culture, but not in some, I don't feel like I embrace different cultures in a way to acculturate, right? Like I understand that when I move somewhere new, that I'm, participating in their culture, but I'm not like trying to like take over or like, like take their culture, right? I'm just participating,
and respecting.
And I think that's what the military taught me, right? Like, I feel like because of my background, I could get dropped in any different culture and feel cool. Like I could be the only black person at a Cambodian wedding. Yeah. And I'm cool with that.
Well, I think you develop a global view of yourself in the world, and you have an appreciation for how different cultures are. I mean, you've been all over. You've been in Africa. You've been in China. Yeah. You were born in Germany. I mean, you've had an amazing life.
Yeah. And like I said, like, and with that part is like, I can get invited to a completely foreign culture and not feel like I'm taking up all the space in that culture. I'm hanging out, and I'm just bringing up many examples where people like, like I have friends from all over the world in different cultures, and I thought about it was like, that was not weird to me in my mind. It was like, of course I know I got a friend from Cambodia. Yeah. Of course I got a friend from China. Of course I got a friend, from different part. And I tried this different food and all that stuff. Yeah. And like, it was, just how I grew up.
Well, and you have that now at George Mason, where you're in a global community there.
Yeah. Yeah. So one of the things I was thinking about too, as we were thinking about this, was the thought of the opposite. Like, if you can go back in a time machine and talk to that guy that says, you have no skills. And now you're more assertive. I don't know who this quiet, non-talk back Joan was, because that's not the one I know now, for sure. What would you say to that person? Say, you know what? I am a attached traveler.
Yeah.
I have way more skills than you can think of. What would you say to that person?
Well, I think back then they were looking for very concrete services to provide to communities in South America. So they wanted nurses, they wanted engineers, they wanted very concrete services. And so they probably thought, well, we can teach anybody Spanish,
Yeah.
So, but other people I've talked to said, oh, you would have been on the next plane.
Yeah, exactly.
But it all worked out.
Yeah. I mean, but what skills then besides languages? What do you think? I think of okay, you said resilience. I think adaptability. I think being able to pick up a new language. I think cultural awareness. I think
Well, it helped me in El Paso because I was in the Chicano community teaching a bilingual preschool, and then Jeff was living in this tiny little town on the Texas border outside of El Paso where almost no one spoke English. So, that was an incredible experience to feel like I'm back in a Latin American country practically, and it was Texas. So that was yeah.
And also one thing I thought about is love Jeff, and I think about my military background, how it's helped me in my relationship with Maggie. Meaning, it's helped me be like the guy that's I'll go there. All right, whatever. Is there any things that you think of because of your background, it helped you in Jeff's relationship?
Well, I think I had a different view of the world, and we traveled a lot. We took the girls to Europe twice. We went to Hawaii 3 times. We just loved seeing the world and being very open to different cultures when we were there. I think that made a big difference.
Yeah. Is there one thing? And this is my last question. We've got our last segment. Is that when you met me as your son-in-law, when you found out I was a military brat, was that a happy thing? I mean, I know it's a happy thing, but what were your thoughts when you knew that I was a military child too?
I was thrilled because I knew you and I spoke the same language. We had the same experiences. It's just a very unique way to grow up. And so I knew you'd have that resilience and that ability to adapt to new situations and to be open with whoever you met in your life. And that's a real gift. And I think, but I don't want to idealize it because a lot of families struggle with that. And I think especially the Navy families where the father then was out for 6 months
on ships.
Half a year they'd be gone on a ship almost every other year. So I think those families really struggled, where my father was never, except for the year in Iran. He was usually gone for a couple weeks, but not for 6 months at a time.
Very similar.
Yeah.
My dad was only gone for Desert Storm.
Yeah.
But so I think we're right. We're idealize whatever.
Idealize.
That's it. Yeah. But it is it's a very disruptive thing, right? It is not for the faint of heart of that disruption on family structures and family systems.
Yeah.
And like I said, I think the world is recognizing the additional supports that these families need when they're disrupted, supporting a mom that's by herself with all these kids, or how to help, get them services, or I think a lot of the groups are really together. So when a mom needs to have mom friends, she's building them really quickly with other military moms. So I feel like people are addressing those unique issues of military families because of all the things you said.
Yeah. Yeah, the mothers develop an incredible bond, and the head of the squadron or the admiral's wife is often called to kind of take care of the other wives.
Yeah.
To kind of comfort them through that next 6 months and give them guidance and practical advice and everything. I've worked with a lot of officers' wives over the years, and they talk about how the responsibility is huge. and no one ever recognized that. It was an informal role that was very demanding.
And the only reason I'm smiling is because it just brought up two stories, like Karen Foyt, right? She was like, when I moved to Fort Hood, I like unofficially got a title, and I had like all this work I had to do as a military mom, military wife. And it's like, you're right. Like, it wasn't like recognized, but it was like, okay, you're coordinating this and you're doing this and this. And then it's like a almost position in itself. And then thinking of my Uncle Kip, Aunt Joyce was like the first lady, right? She got the, 4-star general husband, and she's like the first lady, where she's literally looked at as a leader position. But like, as you said, it's not paid. It's just like assumed, Yeah. And so it's work to be a military wife too. Yeah. Well, thank you. So we're going to go to a segment called Shot for Shot. That's a last. You get to ask me any random question. I get to ask you any random question. You want to go first? I'll go first.
Where was your favorite place you lived?
Oh, okay. Here. I mean, like, sorry, like you saw your trajectory. Austin, was it Austin? Sorry. Austria, Arizona, Maine, Jersey, Bogota, and Carlisle. Well, mine was Germany, Fort Belvoir, Kansas, this area, Northern Virginia, Alabama, in this area. So it's really easy to bring that one up to up to the top.
This must feel more like home to you.
Yeah, I mean, I think I could say I am a Virginian and felt more connected. And as I said, at least for me, which was a benefit, which I know is not typical, was that I would leave and come back to something as a base. Leave and see my friends Marcus. Like, he literally I could say I had a friend from childhood, which is not what a lot of military kids, get to have. So, my identity's here, Virginia, my community's here. I feel like I'm, going to high school in my formative years. That's a blessing too, that by the time I went to high school, my dad was done. So being able to stay put and go all the way through high school at Mount Vernon was a blessing, which I saw too, because Mount Vernon being so close to Fort Belvoir, we had those kids that were like dropped right at their senior year. And I'm like, dang, I feel bad for them. Yeah. And so I would say it's my favorite. Kansas was very memorable, and Alabama was very memorable for good and bad reasons. I would say Kansas was very special for me because that's when Jeannie was there. Yeah. So I would say that was pretty good because she was there, but it wouldn't be my favorite place to live. I'd love to have Jeannie here. It don't matter where it was. But I would say here. And I'm not, my family, met my wife here. I have my family. This is my life. So Virginia's my favorite. Yeah. All right. So University of Texas. That's my random question. If you can go back in a time machine and do college over again at the University of Texas, what is one thing you would do differently?
I would branch out and have more friends. I was pretty shy, and I was one of 40,000 students, and I think I got lost in the shuffle. I mean, I had my little niche of a couple friends, but I had my roommates kind of went off the deep end, and I lost. I just lost the connection with them. They kind of went into different life. And so, Jeff was always surprised that I hardly ever went to a party in all the years I was in college. So I would party more.
I love it. See, kids, you need a party when you go to college.
It's the other way around. Most people would say I should have studied more. No, I had a pretty boring life. Yeah. My part, I'm really surprised that you had nationally known football team and didn't go to one game. Yeah. So we're going to have to make that up. We're going to go to Austin. And go to a game.
We're going to go at least one football game. That's what we're going to do. That's my promise. And if anyone wants to hook us up with tickets, that's what we're going to do, because that's the part that just blows my mind. I was like, I went to Cedar Stadium, and it's like the coolest thing ever. And I was like, you didn't go to one game? But I guess, it's just a different time.
1 year, I lived next door to the stadium.
It's Texas.
Well, it was kind of I was into the hippie counterculture stuff because I wasn't a Texan. Yeah. And I identified all the sorority girls, the Texas sorority girls. I was not that person. I was I was the outsider. So I was more into the,
Did y'all listen? I mean, hippie music. Did the musicians come? I know Austin.
Oh, all the time.
Did you go to those shows?
I would go to rock
There it is.
concerts. That was where I was going. Yeah.
Okay, real quick then. What was one rock concert or performance or person that you went to when you were in Austin? That was
Well, I don't remember who it was, but I remember somebody letting me do this light show, help with the light show behind the stage.
That's cool.
And I was doing, all the colored lights and stuff. So that's one. I don't remember seeing anyone famous, though.
Right,
I think Willie Nelson was around, but...
That's cool.
And ZZ Top. Yeah, that was another.
Wait, they're from Texas. Aren't they from Texas
yeah.
with the big beards?
The beard.
Like my friend looked like he's in ZZ Top.
Yeah,
Sam
yeah.
Homer.
Yeah.
Shout out to him. Well, then now we have a new challenge, y'all. We got to go. We got to go. We went to Maine, and Joan finally took me to the land of Maine, which I love. And now we got to go back to Austin, Texas, my favorite place
Right,
in the United
right.
States.
No, Austin was wonderful, and it was a very international community there.
Yes.
Yeah.
And then very progressive in their the education.
Yeah.
Well, this has been a great episode. I'm so glad I finally got you on the podcast. This is a part of the show called Shout Outs and Plugs. Shout out, just say love to anybody and things that you just want the listeners to be aware of, but the stage is yours.
Well, I first want to thank you, Philip, because this is wonderful. And you and I have been talking about doing this for years, so thank you so much for having me. And I'm very grateful to share my life with you. And very grateful for my daughters and my 3 grandsons, my son-in-law, Nick, all my friends who I love so much. I really feel like the friends I have here are family. And my family in Maine and New Hampshire and Jeff's family. I mean, I feel very grateful for this extended family of all of Jeff's family. I feel we've had a wonderful life and never a dull moment.
Yeah. I was going to ask another shot for shot question, but I'll let it go. We'll maybe have to do a part 2. It's about like how do you what's the difference between having 2 girls and then now living with crazy boys? But we can get
we'll talk about that another
We'll talk
day.
about that another time. I don't think she's ever seen so many half-naked little boys run around in her entire life. Like, living with boys is quite different than girls. But Positive Filter listeners, it's been a great episode. Obviously, something very important to me. You know, as you know, every episode is dedicated to the memory of my father-in-law, Jeff Kirsch. So please consider donating to the Jeff Kirsch Anti-Hunger Fund. I put that in every show note. Also, if you're a member of the Mason Nation, please consider sharing kindness by submitting a Pats for Patriots for a fellow Mason Patriot to be kind to them as well. Thank you for listening. Thank you for engaging, and just keep on being kind and positive to each other. And we're out. Thank you for listening to Positive Filter, a podcast that focuses on family, friends, career, with a little self-help along the way. If you enjoyed this podcast, please share it with your family and friends, and like the Facebook page, Spreading Positivity of Movement. Thanks for listening.